Darkness cloaked Abbottabad, Pakistan on the night of May 1st, 2011. A small town unaware that it was about to witness history unfold. Overhead, 2 stealth helicopters flew in formation, carrying Navy SEAL Team 6, America's most elite fighting force, on a mission that had been 10 years in the making to bring justice to Osama bin Laden. But even the best laid plans can go awry. As the helicopters hovered over the compound, disaster struck. One of the Black Hawks malfunctioned, crashing into the courtyard. The team's cover had been blown. It could all go wrong in an instant. In enemy territory, surrounded by uncertainty, the soldiers had no choice but to adapt, pushing forward into the unknown. Every moment was laden with tension. What if bin Laden wasn't there? What if the compound was booby-trapped? The stakes couldn't be higher. With the world watching from afar and a decade of grief and rage driving them forward, the SEALs knew there was no turning back. The mission, dubbed Operation Neptune Spear, had been in the planning for months. The level of secrecy was unprecedented. Even key members of the government had no idea it was happening. Only a select few knew what was about to happen, and the US military ensured that the Afghans, the Pakistani government, and any possible leaks were kept in the dark. In September 2010, the CIA discovered that a known al-Qaeda courier was frequently visiting a compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan. Over the next few months, the agency used surveillance, informants, and intelligence gathering to determine that Osama bin Laden and his family were likely hiding in the compound. President Barack Obama discussed the difficult decision to attack, noting that while the evidence was not conclusive, it was the best intelligence available. The operation was given the codename Neptune Spear, after the trident symbol of the US Navy SEALs. The raid begins. On May 2nd, 2011, 24 SEALs from SEAL Team 6 flew in using 2 MH-60 Black Hawk helicopters, taking varying routes to avoid detection. The compound was surrounded by barbed wire, 18-foot walls, and 7-foot walls around the balconies, designed to obscure lines of sight. As the SEALs descended into the compound, one of the specially equipped Black Hawks lost control due to the different air conditions compared to the training site, forcing a soft crash landing. A backup CH-47 Chinook was launched from Jalalabad to make up for the downed helicopter. The SEALs began clearing the compound, engaging in a firefight with armed combatants at both the guest house and the main building. As they pressed deeper into the labyrinthine building, they were faced with narrow hallways and locked doors. Every turn was a potential ambush, but after clearing floor after floor, they finally reached the upper level of the compound, where their target awaited. During the raid, Abu Ahmed al-Kuwaiti, bin Laden's primary courier, a second courier and his wife, bin Laden's son, Khalid, and Osama bin Laden himself were killed. The primary weapon used by the SEALs was the Heckler & Koch 416, a piston-driven AR platform with a short barrel variant for increased maneuverability in the compact urban space. The identity of the SEAL who fired the shot that killed bin Laden is a matter of debate, with both Matt Bissonnette and Robert J. O'Neill claiming responsibility. Regardless, the mission was accomplished, and the code word Geronimo was radioed to the White House, signaling bin Laden's death. The SEALs were on the ground for approximately 40 minutes, gathering intelligence, scuttling the downed Black Hawk, and evacuating the compound on the Chinook with bin Laden's body. Before we dive further into the mission, it's important to understand why bin Laden was so crucial. He wasn't just a terrorist, he was the face of a global jihadist movement that had terrorized the world for over a decade. Osama bin Laden, the founder and first general emir of al-Qaeda, was born in 1957 in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, to a billionaire construction magnate. He studied at King Abdulaziz University, where he was influenced by radical Islamist ideas and participated in the Afghan jihad against the Soviet Union in 1979. Bin Laden co-founded Maktab al-Khidmat, which recruited foreign mujahideen, and later established al-Qaeda in 1988 for worldwide jihad. In the 1990s, bin Laden declared war on the United States and orchestrated several attacks, including the 1998 US Embassy bombings in East Africa. He was listed on the FBI's Most Wanted Terrorists list and was designated as a terrorist by the United Nations. Bin Laden accused the US of waging war against Muslims and called for the overthrow of autocratic Arab regimes. His most infamous act would come on September 11, 2001, when his group orchestrated the deadliest attack on American soil. 19 militants associated with al-Qaeda staged attacks in the US, killing nearly 3,000 people. It was a usual Tuesday morning on September 11, 2001. In New York City, the sun shone bright and people went about their daily routines. But at 8:46 a.m., everything changed. The unthinkable had happened. America was under attack. 19 militants associated with the Islamic extremist group al-Qaeda hijacked 4 airplanes and carried out suicide attacks against targets in the United States. 2 of the planes were flown into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York City. A 3rd plane hit the Pentagon just outside Washington, D.C., and the 4th plane crashed in a field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. At 8:46 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11 crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center, unleashing a massive explosion that instantly killed hundreds of people and trapped hundreds more in the upper floors. Just 17 minutes later, at 9:03 a.m., United Airlines Flight 175 slammed into the South Tower. Both towers collapsed within an hour and 42 minutes, causing tremendous destruction and loss of life. At 9:37 a.m., American Airlines Flight 77 crashed into the western side of the Pentagon, causing a partial collapse of the building and a huge fire. 189 people were killed in the Pentagon attack. In the skies above Pennsylvania, passengers and crew members aboard United Airlines Flight 93 learned of the other attacks via phone and air traffic control. They attempted to retake control of their plane, and in the ensuing struggle, the plane crashed into a field near Shanksville, killing all 40 passengers and crew members aboard. The attacks resulted in extensive death and destruction, and triggered major US initiatives to combat terrorism. Nearly 3,000 people were killed during the 9/11's attacks, which were the deadliest act of terrorism on US soil. In the aftermath of the attacks, thousands of New York City firefighters, police officers, and emergency medical technicians rushed to the World Trade Center to try to rescue victims and fight fires. Many of them were killed when the towers collapsed. President George W. Bush, who was in Florida at the time of the attacks, addressed the nation later that evening, declaring, "Terrorist attacks can shake the foundations of our biggest buildings, but they cannot touch the foundation of America." The world watched all this in disbelief as the leader of the free world tried to process the catastrophe incident back in New York. The footage from that day remains haunting. Dust-covered first responders rushing to the scene, people screaming and running for their lives. The terror in the eyes of those who knew loved ones were trapped inside the burning towers. America was brought to its knees in an instant. The entire nation was in shock, glued to their televisions, watching their worst nightmare come true. For the first time in decades, the US government was overwhelmed. The sheer scale of the attacks, the uncertainty of what would happen next, left the nation feeling vulnerable. Thousands more were injured, and the lives of millions of Americans were forever changed. The War on Terror, officially known as the Global War on Terrorism, GWOT, was initiated by the United States in response to the September 11, 2001 attacks orchestrated by al-Qaeda. This conflict marked a significant shift in US foreign policy, leading to military engagements in Afghanistan and Iraq, extensive surveillance programs, and a redefinition of national security. In the days following the attacks, President Bush declared a war on terrorism, emphasizing that nations harboring terrorists would be treated as enemies. For years, bin Laden evaded capture, moving between remote hideouts, using couriers to communicate, and relying on loyal supporters to protect him. He became a phantom, always just out of reach. On September 18th, Congress passed the authorization for the use of military force, AUMF, granting the president broad powers to combat those responsible for the attacks. The US military quickly launched Operation Enduring Freedom, targeting the Taliban regime in Afghanistan, which had provided sanctuary to bin Laden and al-Qaeda. The campaign aimed to dismantle terrorist networks and eliminate the threat posed by extremist groups. As the war expanded, the US engaged in various military operations across the globe, employing drone strikes and special operations. The hunt for Osama bin Laden became a primary focus, culminating in the successful raid on his compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan in May 2011. The death of bin Laden was a significant milestone in the war on terror, yet the conflict continued. Critics argue that the war has led to widespread civilian casualties, heightened Islamophobia, and a perpetual state of military engagement that has cost trillions of dollars and resulted in hundreds of thousands of deaths. The frustration of the US military and intelligence agencies grew with each passing year. Bin Laden's ability to remain hidden was not just a failure of intelligence, it was a wound that refused to heal. As the dust settled on that fateful night, the world knew the chapter of Osama bin Laden had finally closed, but at what cost? As the dust settled on the night of May 2nd, 2011, the world saw the end of a long and brutal chapter. The death of Osama bin Laden was a powerful moment, a hard-fought victory for those who had pursued him for years. SEAL Team 6 faced unimaginable risks, from a crashing helicopter to the high-stakes secrecy of their mission. Their bravery and determination were extraordinary, but the shadows of 9/11s and the global fight against terrorism still linger. This operation marked a turning point, but it also left many questions unanswered. The scars of that tragic day are still felt deeply, and the quest for safety and justice continues. If you found this story as gripping and eye-opening as we did, make sure to hit that subscribe button, like, and share. Stay tuned for more intense and detailed explorations of history's most tragic events.